All right. Welcome, everybody. Hope you guys are having a good evening. I'm here to talk about Chris Rusty here to talk to you about relationships and monopolies. It's a pairing of two different topics that is not common. I haven't heard it really talked about very much. Maybe on the broad edges, but not in this context the way it needs to be. And I hope that you all find this discussion important. Before we get started, please be sure to like this post, share this post, and put down whatever thoughts come across your mind in the comments, whether it's regarding relationship, monopolies, and all the different things that we will be discussing. So let's get straight to the point, and let's have the discussion that I'm happy to have here. So I wanted to focus most of my. There's a lot of different ways that monopolies show up in relationships. But I want to focus mainly my comments around the areas of sex, money, and emotions. Those monopolies that show up in our relationship. So let's go ahead and dig into it and break down exactly what I'm talking about. So feel free to put some comments in. Let me know what's going on. I'll try to keep myself posted and aware of what's going on and respond to you guys and as they come in. So with that said, let's get it started. Now, in our lives, we have a lot of different relationships. We have relationships with our various uh, co-workers, that people that we go to work with. We have relationships with our friends, but specifically, we're talking about romantic relationships here. And in the context of romantic relationships, there happens to be a lot of opportunities for certain things to be monopolized. In particular, there are certain things that we have as needs. I'm gonna use the word needs to refer to it. Of course, I'm not necessarily always referring to water and food and shelter and stuff like that. However, I can be referring to that as well. All right. So there's a lot of needs that we all have, and sometimes it's through our relationships, particularly in this context, we're going to be talking about romantic relationships, that some of those needs can be met. And when it may be that might be the only way you might be able to meet these needs, actually, in a lot of contexts. And so I want to highlight those things and also bring out what different types of dynamics in terms of power, influence, and different things like that come up as a result of those things. So first, before we go into those examples, let's talk about what is a monopoly. Well, most of you guys have heard of monopolies before, mostly in the context of economics and the business sector. When somebody has a monopoly over a certain resource, they're the only person that you can, get that thing from. It may not necessarily be the only one, but they control a very large majority share of the market. And when that tends to happen, then what tends to happen is they have control over what prices they can set for those things, because there's no competition really to be able to say they have to set a lower price or anything like that. As with competition, when the market's very diverse, that people have to set their prices low at a competitive rate in order to be able to compete. However, if they don't have that type of competition, then they can raise their price up to 5 million. And if you actually need that thing, or if you crave and desire it bad enough, then you're probably left with just having to pay that price. All right, so that's what a monopoly is. Just want to make sure we understand how monopolies work. I could go into some different examples. So for example, let's suppose I own all the water in the world. That's right. If you want water, any clean water to drink, water to take a bath, whatever, you have to come through me and only me. I'm the only person that has it. Well, guess what? If I'm the only person that's giving water, I can charge whatever price I want. I can say, I'm gonna charge $100 for just a glass of water. That might sound ridiculous to you now. However, if you were thirsty and it's been a few days since you had some water, you can't really go like 3 days or so and live without water, right? You're gonna have to have it in some way or some form in your diet. So at some point, you're gonna be like, okay, shoot, doggone it, I'll pay this $100. It's a ridiculous price, but I'll pay this $100 because I have to keep living, right? That would be a sort of monopoly on water being enforced against you, right? And it's because I have that monopoly that suddenly I'm able to charge outrageous prices, even though I don't want to. We know these monopolies exist in pharmaceuticals and stuff, so where they're the only people that can sell the medicines that they might have created without competition for a while. So things like that can happen where, it might only take them a few bucks to make the medicine, but they're charging, thousands for it or something. So We see those things in different areas, and a lot of people mostly associate negative feelings with monopolies. All right. So, but I would also mention that it's not always negative. So I don't want you to come at this conversation like, "Uh-oh, monopoly is always negative, bad." I want to make sure I'm coming at from a neutral standpoint, that I'm just want to highlight that there exists monopolies, either in the past or in the present tense, in various different forms in our relationships, where, hey, our partner, through our relationship, this is the only way you can get these certain needs met. All right. And if we don't talk about the fact that there are monopolies in that sense, and be able to understand how that relationship's going on and what impact it has, then there's a lot of stuff that happens subtly, a lot of subtle manipulation and different power dynamics that go on, where people can use leverage on you and put you in situations that you may not necessarily want to be in, because not everybody approaches relationships with the same right intentions, consciously or subconsciously. So let's bring that conversation to the forefront. I want to bring it up. So make sure you like the post, share it with your friends, tag folks if you think this would be good for them to be able to hear this. All right. Send it in a messenger if you need to. All right. So, but let's go with an example of a positive monopoly. Let's say, for example, birthdays and Christmas. If those are the only holidays where your parents actually go out of their way and spend the big money, whatever big means for you, that's relative to each household, right? So if you're only used to getting, if you ask your parents for something that costs maybe $5 or something, you get it. But if you go much higher than that, you're probably not going to get it. Then in that context, you're probably looking forward to days like your birthday or Christmas, where suddenly $50 and $100 items are suddenly showing up under the tree. And it's not just that, in terms of the price of the items, but also the quantity. If there's no other days of the years where suddenly you have tons and tons of presents and gifts to open up, and those are the only days of the years that are monopolized as the days where, hey, a lot of folks are honoring and cherishing you with gifts in various different ways. That brings an extra specialness to those occasions, to whether it's Christmas or a birthday, in ways that other days of the year don't get to have that level of specialness to you. So you can say, in a sense, that those days of the year enjoy somewhat of a monopoly. And it's a monopoly. It's a monopoly that we actually encourage. We artificially create within ourselves as, hey, we're going to do this on these days, in order to make it special, to give it that extra significance, make it stick out for our own purposes and needs. All right. So that's a type of monopoly, if you will, in that context. I know, again, we only think about monopolies in terms of economy a lot of times, but I just want you to think about it. It's like, hey, if we make something exclusively special, where this is the only way that can happen, and it only happens on this day of the year, so on and so forth, then all of a sudden that has a monopoly on that type of experience in your life. And so all of a sudden it has more value. That if for some reason you don't get to celebrate Christmas the way you used to, or you don't get to celebrate your birthday if you used to, if it don't fall on the weekend like you wanted to, if you got to work on your birthday, suddenly it's not as special as you're used to it being. It doesn't hit the same way, and people getting down and in the dumps sometimes if it doesn't go the way they want it to go. All right, and that's because we've given those days of the year a monopolized experience that other days of the year don't have. Well, so all right. So again, I want to. So one thing that's key about a key factor of monopoly is exclusivity. I want to focus on that as well. When you have exclusive rights and access to something, that also gives you a bit of power, and so to speak. So let's say, for example, we just had the Tyson fight, came on Netflix, right? Netflix has exclusive rights to air that, and so therefore, since there were no other competing networks able to air it, Netflix was able to charge their normal subscription fee, and you had to pay it in order to watch it, of course, legally at least. But Netflix made a lot of money, probably with some extra subscriptions from folks that would have otherwise not even subscribed and don't even care about the other stuff that they have to watch on that service, but they paid for it to get the Tyson fight. But not just the Tyson fight, but any other type of pay-per-view event, right? You watch UFC fights that came on the next day after with John Jones, right? So that's they have exclusive relationships with ESPN Plus, the pay for pay-per-view through them. So again, there are people who are getting ESPN Plus memberships that may not otherwise get those memberships if they weren't interested in seeing those fights. And all of a sudden, ESPN makes a lot of money and they can charge high prices for these events. I think it was like $70 or something if, with my ESPN Plus subscription to be able to watch that event, which is quite a lot of money considering all the stuff that we watch on TV for free, right? Or in other venues for a whole lot less money. So exclusivity tends to cost more. Kind of an example of me charging $100 for it gives you more power, but it also costs more for you to even be able to achieve exclusivity. All right, if you want exclusivity, uh, and those rights. For example, let's talk about the Olympics. NBC had exclusive rights to be able to air it, so a lot of folks ended up buying subscriptions to their streaming platform, Peacock, right? To get access to watch whatever they wanted to watch at any time. It was very convenient. So I'm sure their numbers went through the roof and they made a lot of money off of that. But they also had to pay the Olympics a lot of money to get that exclusive rights to it, because the Olympics could have said, hey, anybody and everybody could air my stuff as long as they pay a certain fee to air it. And that fee that they would have to charge to air it, if anybody and everybody could air it, would be a whole lot less than the fee they would charge if they could only go to one person. Because if you're the only person that can, if NBC is the only channel that can air this, then and I'm missing out on all the money I could have made from other folks that want to be able to air it too, then you have to pay me the amount of money I would have made off those other folks too, in order for me to go directly exclusively to you. I might give you a slight discount because, dealing with a whole bunch of other partners and stuff has its own technical difficulties and stuff, and to cooperate and maneuver. And so it's easier to work with one partner. So there are some discounts that come with that. But at the end of the day, they're pretty much having to buy out what all the other places would also be charging. So so it costs us to be able to have the exclusive access in a lot of cases, but as well as you're able to charge and to get a return on that investment, a high price for folks to be able to get access to it, because there's usually a high demand for those type of things. All right, so there's aspects of power and leverage that's tied in with having monopolies. So that's important for you to be able to understand. You have the power and ability to set your price the way you want to when you have a monopoly, especially if it's a resource that everybody needs. Like the water example. If you need water and you have to go through me, I can set a pretty steep price and you're going to either have to pay or you're just going to suffer tremendously without it. So, those are the types of things. And so you can set your own terms for a lot of different things and get things to happen your way with that. And also what comes with exclusivity is that indirectly people value you more. All of a sudden, Netflix is pretty cool. They're hosting fights and stuff. That's all right. I see that little N logo every place. People value, you get a name for yourself. Hey, if I'm the only person that people have to go to get water, I'm the big dog. Everybody respects me. Hey, Chris, I'm going to be your friend and everything because I know you got that water, right? Suddenly people value more. It's not really as much as you as it is what you have the monopoly over, but indirectly they end up valuing you at the end of the day because of that. All right. So we broke down what monopoly is. I've gone into some details of some of the aspects that it has to do with. So now let's talk about relationships specifically. What is it about relationships that we have monopolies over? And I'll do three different examples. The first example is something that it happens both ways with both sexes, male and female. The second example I'll focus on as a monopoly that men have had traditionally, and then I'll also focus on one that women have had traditionally as well, so we can understand that. So let's go across the board and make sure we understand all those things. So first, let's talk about sexual monopolies. It's inside the context of relationships that romantic relationships specifically, that you're allowed to have sex with people, whether that relationship lasts for just the evening or for several years, right? So sex is something that's exclusively found in romantic relationships, and oftentimes people monopolize those relationships. Have you ever heard of monogamy, for example? What that basically means is like, hey, you can't go sleep with somebody else. You can only sleep with me in this relationship. That is a type of monopoly. You were saying that, hey, I can only get this need met through my partner. And so because they're only allowed by contract to get that through, I'm not saying you wrote it on pencil and paper, but you've made some agreement, right? There's an understanding that, hey, you're not supposed to be going to anybody else to get sex. You can only get that through me. And because of that, through monogamy, that means that, they can't go out and get it from anywhere else. So that's a need that a lot of people have. And I throw it in the need column because, all of us have an innate biological sex drive within us, what's called a libido, right? And some of us have higher sex drives than others. Associated with testosterone, men tend to have on average, tend to have a higher sex drive than women. On average, not always the case in every relationship and every circumstance. It can change over time, right? You can start out a relationship with one person have a higher sex drive, and then all of a sudden, over the years, it changes up where another person might have it in a certain phase, right? But I'm just talking about on the averages of things. The average male has a higher sex drive than the female, and that's partly largely due to testosterone. If you look at even you can go on YouTube and even watch videos when you have trans men that start taking testosterone and blocking their estrogen. When they do that, all of a sudden they start having a stronger sex drive, and it's noticeably stronger. And they have to find ways of learning how to deal with it because it's it gets to be something. It's like, oh my gosh, it's something different. There's people that have wrote articles about it and how for some reason or another they had to take testosterone, and it's like, wow, I get men now and why they do some of the stuff they do. It's that sex drive can be huge, humongous. However, our biology that we're born with that creates this sex drive that has people turning their heads looking and wanting to go after folks and take their shots and all this other stuff. That ends up inflating the value of sex just because that sex drive. If that sex drive wasn't there, if our biology didn't have any drive whatsoever for it to happen, then people be like, I could take it or leave it. It'd just be like another activity, like throwing a frisbee or something, right? But I don't have nearly as strong of a drive to throw a frisbee as I do to engage in intercourse. So, and that applies for just about pretty much all of us. So there's a high value in the market because of that. That increases the values just simply because our biology, we're born with those that drive for it. And then there's probably some people that don't have much of a drive at all. They're kind of asexual about things, and so they would look at things a lot different, have a lower value of it. But the vast majority of us do, and so that ends up being something of high value. But with that said, monogamy, the simple fact that you can only get it from that one person that you're supposed to be loyal to, that means you can't go to somebody else. That means that the person that you're with in a relationship ends up having a higher value. Now, you can think of that as negatively or positively. Again, I gave you guys the example of Christmas and your birthdays as the only days when you get tons of presents in quality and quantity. That other days of the years, you don't tend to get that type of recognition. And so therefore those days are special to you because they've kind of monopolized the gift receiving time of the year for you. Right. And so when some people value that, it's like, hey, that's a monopoly that I want to keep going because I want to be able to continue looking forward to valuing those days in those ways. Cool. Well, you could think of monogamy in the relationship as a way of, I want to highly value this person because they can give me one of the, it can be the only source of one of my huge needs, and I can always go to them for that, and I can be grateful for that, and I can love them and cherish them for that, right? That you can look at that from a positive aspect. Of course, you can also look at it from a negative aspect as like, man, there's so much stuff I want to do out here, there, and wherever, and this is the only person I can go to. Oh, it's going to be tough or whatever, right? So it's all a matter of perspective or whatever. But we do want to recognize that that is a type of monopoly. And some people use those monopolies in manipulative ways. Just because monopoly exists doesn't necessarily mean that it's being used in a bad way. Like, for example, most of us get our water from the government, for example. They kind of government, yeah, I guess you can kind of say that, but we get a lot of, they run and regulate a lot of things in our lives. A lot of us go to public schools, for example, but they're not charging us $5 million, per person to go to school, right, and stuff like that. So, not necessarily just because a monopoly exists, doesn't mean that there's automatic exploitation. There, if a person is good natured and all that other stuff and handles that in a well way, then it's fine. But if they don't, then they might not go so far. So, for example, in relationship, you have people that withhold sex, right? They withhold affection in a lot of different ways, and you might make certain bids for affection, and they're trying to turn in the shoulder, going the other way, and so on and so forth. Sometimes if folks are in a bad mood, they not like you right now, then don't you ain't getting nothing, no affection from me or whatever. So it can be used as a punishment. It can be used as a manipulative tool in order to get what you want. A lot of people can use that in a lot of different ways while still enforcing the exclusivity monogamous contract, where they say that, hey, you still can't get it from nowhere else, but I'm going to deny it over here so you can feel the drought a little bit. So whether it's intentional, right? Some people do it intentionally, but other folks, it may not necessarily be intentional. It's kind of like where when a child throws a tantrum, they're not necessarily intentionally knowing what they're doing and why they're doing it. But you can actually, psychologists, they'll tell you that the way you get them to stop throwing tantrums is to stop giving them their way after they throw the tantrum, because bottom line is it tends to work. If they throw their tantrum yelling and all this other stuff, a lot of folks is like, you know what, I just want some peace and quiet. Here, I'm just gonna give you what you want. Nagging works, so that's why people do it. You know what, I just want some peace and quiet. Here, I'm gonna give you what you want. So some people, that's like a reward system. We all work off of rewards. If we press the button and you give us $1 million every time I press the button, I'm gonna keep pressing the button. I don't know why I'm pressing the button. I'm just doing it. It's reactively. Our brain will suddenly just get used to it and love it, and it'll associate positive feelings with it as well, with chemicals and rushes and stuff. So the same thing, applies in other contexts as well. There's some people that bait and switch as well. They might use sex to secure the relationship, hold up their end of the bargain in that regard. So you have to exclusively come to me for it. Can't go anywhere else, otherwise you're violating the terms. And there are social standards and expectations that you have to stick to it too. Otherwise, your reputation might be damaged, and so on and so forth, right? Or whatever punishments comes with divorces and things like that, right? So they can bait you into the relationship or into the marriage, whatever. But then later on, there's a switch that somehow suddenly it's not happening no more. It's not going on. It's not necessarily that the person turned into a bad individual. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Who knows? But at some point they switched up the contract, but they're still expecting exclusivity on that end as well too. And so therefore it puts somebody in a pretty dire situation where people start becoming vulnerable. They feel temptation a whole lot of other places because they still have the drive for it, and other folks might be willing to offer it, but they're only supposed to do it here. So, it gets people into a vulnerable situation. Also, if you have a lower libido, then it's probably easier for you to be able to abstain and withhold than the person with the higher libidos, right? And in those type of situations, it may be that way around, but it doesn't have to be, right? Because people do it as a punishments and things like that. I'm in a bad room right now. I ain't feeling what I don't like what you did earlier. And so, we not doing none of that tonight, uh, and that's right. And that's how it happens. But not everybody uses it as a power play. Some people, they just consistently, it's like, hey, if I'm gonna be the only person that give it to you, I'm gonna give it to you. This is what it is. But that's one source of a type of monopoly, and we have to be able to discuss those things to talk about the things that show up in relationships where we end up having monopolies. We can only get it from one place. All right, so that's a two-way street that can show. Men and women both want those monopolies, and there's different reasons for it. You can talk about historically why those monopolies might exist. For example, men would want a monopoly. It's like, hey, you can only sleep with me because I want to make sure that that my children that you have, those are my offspring, that they're not somebody else's, right? So that there's evolutionarily, you would think that our evolution would want our minds to actually people who have that mindset of making sure that as their speeds pass, they would have more children spread under their name than some people who didn't care about it. Because if you didn't care about it, then all of a sudden other folks are having the children instead of you, right? While you're also supporting and working hard and breaking your back, taking care of them and taking all these risks and stuff, but they're not even your offspring. So your genes aren't being passed forward. So it comes to an end. That gene line comes to an end at that point. But the people who ensured it was there, had that stipulation of monogamy in that aspect. They ended up reproducing. Same thing around with the women, though. Well, of course, they know who their, that their child is theirs. It came straight out of their belly, right? So it's not that important for that aspect. But also, if the, why, if you link in the past, hundreds of thousands of years and so on and so forth, you can, that most women had multiple childbirths. They were pregnant after pregnant after pregnant after pregnant. Just their whole entire years until they hit menopause. They pretty much was having babies back to back. More and more of them to come out there and help plot a field and help do all this other stuff. There's a lot more ways of dying throughout the history. We have modern medicine is wonderful. It gets rid of a lot of things. We have a lot of comfort and conveniences that old traditionally human beings didn't have. But a lot of people did not survive childhood, so that's why you had to have multiple kids back to back. You might be delivering a dozen or more kids easily, right? And some of us have parents and stuff that have like almost like a dozen siblings or something like that, right? So you may understand that it's only more recent history that's kind of faded away more so. However, with that said, if a woman is pregnant back to back to back to back to back to back over time, right, and got that big old belly, got to carry that around, your mobility is limited and all this other stuff, you tend to need protection. You tend to need somebody to help, to be providing and so on and so forth. So men helped in that aspects of things through that child labor and all that stuff, as well as to be able to get with the caring and rearing of the children and stuff, so to give that extra support. So because of that, if the woman had exclusive access to sex that man strongly desired and wanted and needed, then therefore if he was exclusively only coming to her for it and not going to somebody else, then that means that he's invested in her, he values her, and so all of his work and effort investments not being split up with other women and stuff. So if you think about it from a money standpoint, if I only have $50,000 median income, then that $50,000 is not being split between 2 or 3 or 4 different homes, right? Because the more homes it's split between, the less effective it is in being able to help make sure that everybody's able to get by and survive. So there's an incentive in that regard for exclusivity both ways. So that's just looking at some of the history and all that stuff that goes in behind it. But the bottom line is it's a popular thing in our current culture, and that is a source of monopoly. So now let's move on to the next type of monopoly that I want to discuss. And that is, so this first one's going to be a monopoly that men have traditionally had, all right, in the past. And that's money, right? A monopoly on making money, earning income, right? And we've all heard about it. We've learned about our history. We've learned about the women's rights movement and so on and so forth. People have heard the statistics that I think it was in like the 70s when the first women were able to even have a bank account in America, right? That type of thing. So men's were the only ones that could even have certain jobs, could earn incomes, could own property, could be responsible for paying debts. That could be a bad part or a good thing, whatever you want to think of that as. But I mean, if you don't allow somebody to make an income, how can they be responsible for debt, right? But anyways, and so on and so forth, right? And so if somebody, if we live in a world where money is the way that you get the things that you need, such as the food you eat, the water you drink, the clothes that are on your back, the roof that's over your head, right? The table that the food is provided on, the shoes that are on your feet, etc. Then if money is the only way to do that, and men are the only ones that are able to make that income, then that made women dependent upon men. Right? So that's that history that we've all learned about. We all know about. All right. And so that created a monopoly. Men had a monopoly on money. If you have a monopoly on money, that indirectly increases your value, like I explained earlier. All right. If I'm the only person that owns water in the city, then hey, that increases my belly. I'm the man. Everybody wants to come to me, get on my good side. Maybe I'll give you a little water for free, give you a discount, that type of thing. Well, guess what? That increases the value of men in the society when women can only come to men in order to get their basic needs met, because they need food, water, and so on and so forth. Of course, they could have their parents, their father, take care of them, right, and and live their whole life. But again, they would never be able to have a family of their own. They wouldn't be able to have romance and different things like that. They're just living underneath their father's roof and having them take care of the whole time. So the other alternatives, like, hey, you can have a husband, get married, and then he can be the one that provides you, and you can have value, you can be thankful for him, and all this other stuff. And so men would have that value and that purpose, um, and that need. So it was like a artificial need for men was created by those type of laws, right? Of course, those laws over time, were changed, right? Women got more access to more areas within our society, breaking more and more glass ceilings every year. And so to the point where now it's quite common to where women will say, "Hey, I'm an independent woman. I make my own money. I bought my own house, my own car, my own shoes, my clothes, whatever it is, right? I don't," and they'll let you know proudly and boldly, "I don't need a man for nothing. I can take care of myself." Right? And so that's what happens when the monopoly breaks down. When the monopoly breaks down, then it's like, okay, well, I can do these things for myself. And so what do people do? Do they still decide, hey, I value going through men for this monopoly? Thinking of it for similar like Christmas and your birthday, for example, it's like, hey, I value those holidays being monopoly ways that I can get gifts that are expensive or in high in quantity or from a lot of different people. And so I'll keep those days as the only days I do that, so that, they stick out as special from the rest. So similarly, I'm like, we need, I like to be able to value and depend on men in this way. I feel like that's a special role that they can fit in. And so I'm okay with allowing that to be a monopoly and allowing a man to take care of me and everything. I want to sit in my feminine energy or whatever you want to call it. Right. So, so that's a perspective that you could take on it. Of course, another perspective is you could say it was like, hey, I never did want to get in that marriage, that relationship or something anyways, right? Especially, let's say, for homosexual women that aren't even attracted to men, but somehow they still feel like they have to end up getting married and move on with them. Otherwise, they're going to be in some dire or bad situations and not be able to take care of themselves, or be on the outskirts of society, shamed and having other social implications as well placed upon them, right? So the other side of it's like, hey, I don't necessarily need a woman, man. I don't necessarily want to be with one either. So now that I can make my own money on my own, I'm gonna bypass men altogether. I ain't gonna even mess with them. Holla, with deuces. I enjoy my independence, right? That's the other side of the spectrum. And of course, there's varying levels, in between that. Again, I think about it as a spectrum. So, but one thing that you did see happen, that as women got more access to economic equality, that ended up leading to fewer marriages, right? The marriage rate has decreased. That also led to more divorces, right? Why? There's a lot of pressure for a woman to stay in a relationship, especially if it's a bad relationship, for example, or a relationship where they just didn't want to be in a relationship, but they felt like they had to because they weren't allowed to take care of themselves on their own, right? So it's kind of like, hey, how am I going to get food in my mouth if I get a divorce type of thing? Well, if you don't have to worry about how I'm gonna get food in my mouth, I can just go work a job and make my own money. Then there's gonna definitely automatically by default you're gonna expect there's gonna be fewer marriages to a certain degree and more divorces to a certain degree, simply because of either people leaving bad abusive situations, or they never even wanted the marriage, but the marriage was just a vehicle to get some of their needs met, and so they felt forced into it. All right, but of course there's a lot of folks that feel like even after economic equality initiatives have begun and started taking effect, there's a lot of people that still feel like, hey, I still want to get married. I still have value to it. A lot of women still feel that, regardless of removing the monopoly that men have on that, right? So some people still want marriage. And some people still want the men to be provider in a marriage, pay for all the dates, pay for, all the bills, go 100%, whatever, right? So there's still a desire, nonetheless, that comes from certain people for a lot of these things, even without the monopoly, but it's not as big of a desire. And so the simple fact that fewer people are marrying, or things such as the age of marriage starts increasing with time. Because if there's a lot of pressure, we're like, well, I better hurry up and get married and, secure the best man I can before, while I can, and so on and so forth. If there's a lot of urgency with it, because you can't make your own income, and if you wait too long, you might be out here on the street suffering or something like that. Then all of a sudden, people are like, I can get married when I want to, right? I don't have to necessarily do it in my 20s. I can just enjoy that, have my fun, do my thing, right? Wait till later on or whatever. Biological clock might tick in, and there's some social pressures that might say that, hey, I need to be married before I start having children. So maybe I'll look at it at that point. Or if I don't care about those social pressures of marriage, and I feel like I can just have a kid and I don't necessarily need marriage. Some people have the kids and don't even need the relationship or the man, right? So you can actually go to Ebony K. Williams. She planned on just I think she had frozen some of her eggs or something like that, had those saved up or whatever so that she can have a baby on her own, right? So bypass the man altogether. So the truth of the matter is there's some people that don't even want the relationship, that the relationship was just a vehicle to meet certain needs. It was a means to an end, so to speak. And I know there's a lot of folks that aren't and I'm gonna actually talk about that next in next my next podcast, because it's important that a lot of people realize that some people don't even, they think they want relationships, but they really don't. Uh, sometimes you're taught these lessons, hear all these fairy tales, and you subscribe to all these stories, and you're like, wow, it would be wonderful to stay with that one person the rest of my life. But in practice, if you look at the actions of people do, how they run and leave relationships and all this other stuff, it's like, do you really want it? Do you really? Or is it just a mean to an end? Is there just a beautiful story and you like the way it feels, but in practice, it's not really what you gravitate towards? So we'll actually dive into that, because that's going to be part 2 of this story. So people, hang in there, hang on tight. That should be interesting, and I look forward to being able to tell the rest of that. But I will continue with this one. I need to finish this up, because my next point is going to be, I think it's going to be a good finale, outside of the money monopoly. And that's the monopoly that women tend to have in today's society. All right. So what is the monopoly that's what women tend to have in today's society? Anybody care to guess? Anybody care to guess? It's probably not that hard of a guess, because I did include these things in a post, actually in the headline of the post, right? So the caption of the post, as well as earlier when I mentioned that I'd be going online today to talk about this. So it's in that title as well. But there is a emotional monopoly that women enjoy in society today. All right, to a higher degree than men do, right? Because we all know how men often don't feel free to fully emotionally express themselves, right? They when we raise them up, a lot of times they show emotions in certain ways. We discourage them. It's like, hey, man up. What are you doing there? You can't quit crying. You can't cry. You can't do this, that, or the other, right? So a lot of men, they have this stoic, firm move, like they don't even know what to do. They don't know how to act sometimes. It's like, what kind of emotions can I express? What can I do without suffering in one way or another? And actually it can lead to some people to repress their emotions, act like they don't even have them when they really do. And so when you don't repress them, they go into the subconscious. Still there, they're still acting, and they still might be influencing them in various different ways, but it's just that they're not conscious of it anymore. So those types of things happening, and I think all of society is responsible for that happening. Men has helped enforce it. Women have helped enforce it. Even when men are dealing with each other, you might hear that no HOMO, right? So a lot of people will say that these days, just in the middle of conversations, if they give you a hug and all of a sudden they feel like they got to say that, no, this, right? Well, there's a lot of men that don't feel like they can just embrace another man, right? Just fully just man hug you. Why is that such a big deal? There's in a lot of ways, men can't get their emotional connection needs met with other men the same way women do. So women can hug, embrace each other, have sleepovers, sleep in the same bed, feel all right. And then all of a sudden there's a more of a social stigma where people are judging men a little bit more. People are saying a little bit more things. So there's social pressures that are put there on men where they don't want to look certain ways. What I look like doing that, man? Don't get out of my face with that. People be ready to fight over these types of things. And of course, that has aspects of sexual orientation involved with it. So if your sexual orientation is that you're heterosexual and you don't want to seem like a homosexual, then you are going to be less likely to want to be able to express yourself in certain ways. All right, and do certain things because you don't want to come out that way. And actually, a lot of men have found that hey, if they tell, let's say they've engaged in some homosexual activities, just tried it out, see what's going on. Okay, figure out what wasn't for them. But if they move on and try to be, continue living the rest of their heterosexual life after that point forward, they may find that once the women that they engage with find out that they have engaged in these homosexual activities, that a good portion of them may not be interested no more, just simply by knowing that they do that, they got down that way. So it's one of those things that people feel like they have to keep secret, keep it locked in the closet, so to speak, right? There's a reason why that's all been there. So there's a lot of stigma around it. But even if it doesn't even come down to sexual orientation, move that to the side whatsoever. If a man wants to express himself fully in his emotion, embrace it, get excited about everything, oh my gosh, and all this other stuff like that, you can be like, what? Who is this, a masculine man? There's going to be a lot of people that are going to judge that person, think of them sideways, and not respect them as much. Maybe like, okay, you still my friends, but maybe I won't date you. So there's heterosexual consequences on that end of things. There's a lot of things that can happen as a result of a man fully expressing themselves unbridled 100% in society. There's usually a lot of consequences that comes with that. And so a lot of men do not feel like they have emotional freedom. And so therefore they can't go to their fellow males to express their emotions a lot of times. Even a lot of times, even with their children, a lot of times their children are more likely to to hug and cuddle on their mother than they are to do on their father. And then there's a lot of stigma behind the idea of sexual assaults and things like that, that men with their strong sex drives and libidos and everything, sometimes if they're starved for any type of emotional affection, then some people can go overboard and use them in wrong ways, right? Wrong and violent ways, in contexts that are inappropriate. So then there's the idea that there's some men that ends up abusing that. That also allow men to kind of make it to a point where, hey, a lot of folks won't even allow men to be babysitters, for example, just don't trust them around there. So that emotional connection with children, can't get it from there as much. He's a lot of ways you have men that are living in emotional droughts throughout most of their lives. And the only place where they get to express themselves emotionally, to change form from the incredible Hulk walking around all stoic and muscular and like I'm hard and tough, you can't mess with me, dog, you can't mess with me. The only time they can turn that off is maybe when they come back home with their woman, and they have their quiet time alone. They soften up and turn into that teddy bear, right? And there's a lot of women that fantasize about that idea, right? The same way that Black Widow with in the Marvel movies, her relationship with the Hulk, where he be Hulk smashing all day long, can't nobody stop him. He was just bad. But suddenly, when she comes up to him, the sun is getting low, and she puts that finger up and touches his hands with him. All of a sudden, that brings him back to a regular, softer, gentler human. He's not that person no more. Some women love that idea that somebody can be out there just doing their thing, running the world. Everybody has to kneel to them, so to speak. But in the relationship, I have them soft like butter at that point in time. However, what ends up happening is in their romantic relationships, for a lot of men, are the only times where they're able to express emotions. And because of that emotional monopoly that they have with those women, and I'm not saying it's a full monopoly because they can't express their emotions fully in any old way, right? It has to be, you know, in a certain, it has to be prescribed in certain ways. And of course, are certain emotions that they are allowed to do in society, like show anger and be okay. But anger. There are other emotional needs that men need to express other than just anger, right? So with their woman, that they're the one that tends to have a monopoly on that. That when they go there, that's when they can feel great. They can feel emotionally great, and it makes things a whole lot better. And again, you can look at that different ways. You can look at that from a positive aspect that, hey, this woman holds higher significance to me because this is a place of emotional refuge that I can go to. And in so many corners of my life and society, I cannot express my emotions this way and still be respected and still be able to do the things that I need to do and have the influence that I need to have. But it's when I can come home to my woman that suddenly I'm able to feel certain ways and embrace the way I feel good in these different ways, and soften up and enjoy those moments. And so that ends up, to a certain extent, that can put a heavy burden on women that, wow, they have to carry the whole entire emotional load of a grown man. But they may not fully understand that weight's being thrown on their shoulders because they may not fully understand what a man might be going through, in not being able to fully express himself throughout a lot of periods of his lives, being taught to repress it from childhood through adulthood, in the various different contexts of our lives. So a lot of men want to be able to have that be a safe place for them to be express themselves in a lot of different ways, but some may find out the hard way that it's not always safe to always express themselves that way. And when it happens, a lot of men, they might close up and never open back up for the rest of their lives because they've been emotionally hurt at the one place they're allowed to be emotionally vulnerable. So a lot of people keep it in. Uh, and then a lot of times when men express themselves emotionally to other men, there's a lot of stigmatism about calling that homosexual behavior, pretty much. So a lot of guys stray away from that. A lot of men don't have their close connections. A lot of guys, when they get in relationships with their woman, that's the only person they spend time with. They lose their connections with their friends a lot of times. And it's mainly because their woman ends up being their top emotional source. They're a huge source at that point in time. So they're leaning on that aspect of life. They work hard, they suffer, they sacrifice a lot of times. They're doing things they rather not want to do, whether it's being in wars or doing some of the dirty work in society and certain jobs that nobody else wants to do, or whatever it ends up being. They suffer through that, in part so that they can come home and enjoy the higher emotions of somebody being grateful for them being able to do those types of jobs. And if they're not grateful, and if they happen to not be that, then it can make them it can be kind of a double negative on that. I've went through all that, and on the other end, I don't even get to, have my emotional joy to make it worthwhile on the other side of it. So it can make some people get into dark places. Nonetheless, though, that's an area where there's an emotional monopoly, and when women have an emotional monopoly on men, in a lot of those respects, that allows them to have the potential to have power and influence on them, right? To be able to raise their price and value in the eyes of men. Of course, there are workarounds, just like, women having men having a monopoly on money with women. There's ways of getting rid of those monopolies because a lot of those were artificially created. The same thing's true about this monopoly as well. Men, let's say, for example, you could be homosexual, right? You could go that route and have no problem with it. And actually, more and more these days, that's actually becoming easier. And you could make an argument that maybe, just maybe, that because men lost their main monopoly over money, that might have been one of the key things that might have led to the downfall of people more embracing homosexuality, so that men could be able to have alternative ways of expressing their emotions and losing some of the emotional monopoly that women have over men in a lot of respects. However, not all men are going to want to go the homosexual route, right? Don't necessarily care to go that necessarily route. Nobody, they don't always want that stigma, but there is a lot of folks who do. You'll see them on the internet that try to control, manipulate, and keep men in check in certain different ways. Because if they act certain ways, like, oh, you must be gay, or you must be this, that, and the other, right? And so those accusations of calling dudes gay, or it's like, oh, do you even like women? You must like, you like men. If they do certain things, those can be used as emotional controls to keep men in line. Because again, if they get those labels thrown on them, then they can lose access to their one source of being able to express themselves emotionally in certain ways that they really need to expression. But if they have more ways to express themselves across the spectrum through different sources, like women do, then there might be a decreased value that men have for women, similarly to how women have had a decreased value for men after women have been able to be independent and they don't need a man and can do their own thing. The same thing would happen on the other side of the spectrum if men were able to levelly embrace each other, support each other the same way that women do. Because women, they take care of each other pretty well. Like, even if they're women aren't in a relationship with men, women, they make it easier for a woman to be single and independent, right? They have, even on Valentine's Day, where men used to be able to emotionally manipulate to a certain extent and be like, hey, if you ain't got no date on Valentine's Day, look at you. Well, now they got Galentine's Day. The girls will get together. They have their own good time, right? So they emotionally support themselves. They even find ways to make it easier to be single, to be a single mother, to do a whole lot of things without men and have that independence should they want to have it. On the other side of it, with men, on the other hand, you don't hear as many men saying, hey, I want that independence, because there's a lot of men that are still dependent on on women emotionally for their needs. They're still afraid to be able to get that from other sources, such as a male friend, to be able to embrace and do that without it necessarily being something that's homosexual or homophobic or anything along those lines. So if there was a possibility that men were open to embrace that, to go over that and be able to support each other the same ways and be able to spread out the love and get that emotional affection, support, and different things from one source, it could help women in certain ways, because, hey, women don't have to be a monopoly for that. And so that takes a lot of pressure off their back to have to meet so many needs for men, that they should be able to, spread some of that out and get from other sources in a healthy way. But also, it may lead some men to, hey, decide that maybe, now that my emotions being filled in other ways, and this is not the one primary way that I can express myself and get these type of aspects of my life fulfillment, I might not necessarily even want relationships altogether. All right. And so those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about in terms of the monopolies that have existed in the past. Let me know what you think about those monopolies, or if you think that there might be other monopolies that I haven't mentioned that you think might be important that are going on. But there will be a part two, that will go on and continue the story. What happens after these monopolies are all gone? What happens if the monopolies are all gone and people don't have to go through the vehicle of relationships to achieve the needs that they have, whether they're emotional needs, financial needs, sexual needs, and so on and so forth? What if all of a sudden we were able to meet those needs in other ways? Would we still want in relationships with each other? Would we still want marriage? And actually look at some of the data on what we actually do once some of these things actually happen. When we get rid of these monopolies, do we actually still embrace marriage at the same route? Because a lot of times I think a lot of us expect that, hey, the way women act is programmed into their DNA, that they have to be this way, or that's just the nature of women, or the way men act is programmed into their DNA and it has to be the way men do. And in certain respects, there's obviously stuff that is true. Some stuff nature, some stuff nurture, right? The science supports that. But you don't always know what's what, right? And so some things that you might be assuming is nature might just be the pressures of the situation that, hey, society was structured in a certain way where only I can do it this way. And so I had to do it this way. So I wanted and valued that. But once it suddenly got rid of that, it took some generations for people to adapt and be like, and finally come to the conclusion that, you know what, I've been taught that I'm supposed to do this. And I found out that I really don't want that. And I think we're actually in the midst of one of those processes of transitions now. So, not to spill all the beans on that discussion and go too deep into it, give you an opportunity to be able to hear that for itself. But be looking for that video to come out, part two, in the future, that really looks at, do we really even want relationships? Do we want relationships? Or are they just a vehicle? A means to an end at the end of the day. That's what I want to talk about. And if you look at it from this perspective a little bit more, you might be able to understand what people do and their behaviors and their choices a little bit better, and from a different life. Because I think we all assume that, of course, I want to get married. Of course, I want to have my person to live with the rest of my life. But then you look at what's happening out here, how less frequently certain types of relationships are, and to certain choices people are happening, different things like that. And so let's try to get down to the bottom of it. What's really happening? All right. With that said, leave some comments, like the post, share it, and I appreciate that very much. I hope you guys have a good night. And until next time, I appreciate your time, appreciate your love, appreciate you watching. Love you all. Take care of yourself. Please, thank you, and have a good evening. All right.